We're claiming the portion of your father's estate that rightfully belongs to us. Leave the house." Diane's voice hissed through the phone, crackling with venom. Though a rush of anxiety surged through me, I managed to keep my tone composed. "You'll need to speak to my attorney," I said calmly before ending the call. "I'm Sophie Palmer, a financial consultant living in Chicago, and I'm 34 years old. Just 3 weeks ago, my father passed away following a lengthy struggle with cancer. In his absence, a tangled network of strained relationships and substantial assets remained behind. Among those left in the wake of his death was Diane, my stepmother, who had been married to him for the past 5 years. She had always disliked the close bond one shared with my father. For years, she attempted to sow discord between us, but he never fell for it. What Diane never realized was that my father had long anticipated this very moment. As his illness advanced, he and I had countless conversations about the future of his estate. He observed Diane's increasingly aggressive and controlling behavior. She went as far as blocking my calls and insisting he was too tired to meet with me. Yet, he wasn't easily fooled. During one of our private conversations at his office, he looked at me with quiet resolve and said, "Sophie, I've seen how Diane treats you. I know what she might try to do, and I won't let her take what's meant to be yours." He had already begun legal proceedings with his attorney to ensure everything would be handled according to his exact wishes. The house I had grown up in, the place where all my most cherished memories were born, had been officially transferred to my name well in advance. The bulk of his assets were allocated to me via legally binding trusts and meticulously detailed paperwork that left no opening for interference. Being the planner he was, my father even went as far as recording video statements explaining his choices, fully expecting Diane to challenge the will. Back in my apartment, I set my phone down and couldn't help but smirk at Diane's premature power move. She had no inkling that her attempt to intimidate me out of my rightful inheritance was about to crumble. The lawyer would be contacting her in the morning with news she wouldn't like. Sometimes, the most satisfying form of justice is allowing people to undo themselves through their own schemes. I poured a glass of wine, sat down, and opened my laptop to review the estate documents once again. I had a feeling the days ahead would be anything but dull. My childhood had been shaped by watching my father build his real estate empire from the ground up. When I was just 12, my mother passed away after battling breast cancer, leaving the two of us to rely on each other. That experience forged a deep connection between us. He taught me everything he knew about finance and business, and those lessons naturally guided me into my career. Despite juggling a demanding job, he was always present, never missing a school recital or a late-night homework session. Everything shifted when Diane came into the picture. She worked as a receptionist at one of my father's properties, and within 6 months of meeting him, they were married. At the time, I was 29 and living independently, but I quickly noticed how she began asserting control. At first, it was masked in concern, suggesting my father needed rest or was too busy to take my calls. Over time, her motives became more apparent. Diane, who was 15 years younger than my father, lived a lifestyle that raised eyebrows. She renovated the house from top to bottom, erasing any remnants of my mother's influence. Luxury cars, designer wardrobes, nothing seemed off-limits for her, all under the guise of representing her husband properly. Gradually, she distanced him from his old friends and trusted colleagues, always questioning the loyalty of those who didn't cater to her. About 2 years ago, as my father's health began to deteriorate, his perception of Diane started to shift. He confided in me that he'd caught her rummaging through his financial records late at night and asking unusual questions about his business assets and estate planning. That's when he started putting protective measures in place. "I married her because I felt alone," he told me quietly during one of his chemotherapy treatments. "But I won't let that decision cost you what's yours. You're my daughter. You're my legacy. Everything I've built, I built for you." We dedicated those final months to securing every detail of his plans, making certain there were no legal loopholes. He recorded personal video messages outlining his decisions, anticipating that Diane would try to paint me as someone exploiting him during his final days. Right until the end, my father remained thoughtful and strategic. The weight of his trust in me, combined with his efforts to shield me from Diane's ambitions, only deepened my commitment to see his wishes fulfilled. That evening, surrounded by old family photographs in my apartment, I felt a quiet strength. The real fight was just beginning, but I was ready to face it. The morning after Diane's threatening phone call, I made my way to the office of Richard, my father's longtime lawyer and trusted friend. When I walked in, I was met with his serious expression, one that told me he had important updates to share. "Sophie, Diane's lawyer reached out to me last night," Richard said, flipping through a pile of documents. "They intend to contest the will, arguing that your father wasn't in a sound state of mind when he made the amendments." He paused, letting the words sink in before adding, "What they don't realize is that we have everything on video." My father had made sure every conversation regarding his estate plans was recorded, carefully explaining his decisions while demonstrating full mental clarity. He had even ensured that his doctors documented his cognitive health at the time. It was almost as if he had anticipated exactly what Diane would attempt. "They're requesting an emergency hearing," Richard continued, his voice steady. "Diane is insisting she needs immediate access to the accounts to cover household expenses." He glanced up at me. "But she has no idea that all utilities and bills have already been transferred to your name." A wave of anger coursed through me as I thought about the way Diane had treated my father during his final days, controlling his visitor list, monitoring his phone calls, and making sure she was always present when I came to see him. But my father had outmaneuvered her. He had put everything in place, and now it was time to ensure his careful planning was honored. "When is the hearing?" I asked, already sensing that this would be the decisive moment. "Tomorrow morning," Richard replied. "They're trying to rush it, but that actually works in our favor. They haven't had enough time to fabricate evidence, and we have everything we need." He gave a small smile. "Your father was a brilliant man, Sophie. He knew exactly what he was doing." That night, sleep eluded me. My thoughts were consumed by memories of my father's final days and the way Diane had tried to control every aspect of his life. She had even attempted to prevent me from seeing him in the hospital, insisting he needed rest. But she had no idea that, in those last precious moments, he and I had already set everything in motion. I pulled out the last birthday card he had given me, reading his message once more. "Sometimes, Sophie, the best revenge is letting people stumble over their own greed." Tomorrow, Diane would understand exactly what that meant. As I gathered the necessary documents for the hearing, a mixture of sorrow and determination settled over me. This was no longer just about the inheritance. It was about carrying out my father's final wishes and standing up to the woman who had tried to drive a wedge between us. The next morning, tension filled the courthouse. Diane sat across from me, clad in an expensive black dress, her expression smug. She had even brought her adult children, likely hoping to paint herself as the grieving widow, surrounded by a supportive family. They whispered among themselves, casting glances in my direction, fully expecting an easy win. "Don't let them get to you," Richard murmured as we waited for the judge to arrive. "Everything is in order. Just let the evidence speak for itself." When Diane's attorney presented their case, it unfolded just as we had predicted. He portrayed me as a manipulative daughter who had taken advantage of my father's declining health, while Diane was cast as the devoted wife who had sacrificed everything to care for him. With a dramatic flourish, he even suggested that my father's judgment had been clouded by illness and medication. "Your Honor," he proclaimed, "Mrs. Palmer only wants what her late husband would have wanted, for her to continue living the life they built together and to preserve the home they shared." The word "together" made my blood boil. Diane had been married to my father for 5 years, most of which she had spent enjoying his wealth while keeping him isolated from his loved ones. She had contributed nothing to the business or the home he had spent 3 decades building. Remaining composed, Richard rose to present our case. "Your Honor, we not only have Mr. Palmer's legal documentation outlining his intentions, but also video evidence of him explicitly stating his decisions and the reasons behind them." The room grew silent as a screen flickered to life, revealing my father's face. Though visibly affected by his illness, his gaze remained sharp and resolute. I am making these changes to my will with full mental clarity, he declared firmly. My daughter, Sophie, is the rightful heir to my estate. My current wife, Diane, has been provided for through our prenuptial agreement, but she will not inherit my business or family home. These belong to my daughter. As the recording played, Diane's confident expression wavered, her face draining of color. Her lawyer fidgeted uncomfortably as more evidence was laid out, documented conversations, medical evaluations, and a meticulously organized paper trail my father had prepared. The judge leaned forward, scrutinizing the reports, particularly those confirming my father's sound mental state. But the most damning piece of evidence was yet to come. Surveillance footage from my father's home office appeared on the screen, showing Diane rummaging through his files in the dead of night. Alongside it were bank statements revealing questionable financial transfers she had attempted just weeks before his passing. Richard's voice remained steady as he continued, "Furthermore, Your Honor, we have proof that Mrs. Just days before Mr. Palmer passed away, Palmer tried to move a large amount of money from his business accounts into her personal ones without any approval." The moment this information came out in court, Diane's face shifted from pale to a deep shade of red. Her attorney leaned in, whispering something urgent, but she ignored him and sprang to her feet. "He gave me everything," she blurted out, her composure unraveling. Sophie turned him against me. "That house should be mine. I was his wife." "Mrs. Palmer, please take your seat," the judge instructed firmly. "These outbursts are not helping your case." I kept quiet, watching Diane's carefully maintained image fall apart. Her children looked mortified, avoiding eye contact with anyone around them. Murmurs filled the courtroom as she kept arguing, but then Richard presented the last piece of evidence, a video recorded just 2 weeks before my father died. In it, he clearly voiced his fears about Diane's behavior and explained the reasons behind his decisions regarding the estate. As the video played, the room went quiet. Though visibly weak, my father spoke with clarity, revealing how Diane had tried to isolate him and take control of his finances. "Order in the court," the judge called out, striking the gavel. "With all this compelling evidence," he said, "I am ready to issue my decision." I held my breath, even though deep down, I already knew the outcome. My father had prepared meticulously. There was no doubt. Still, hearing the judge confirm that every one of my father's final wishes would be honored brought a huge sense of relief. Looking Diane straight in the eye, the judge added, "If there is any attempt to challenge this ruling, we will initiate a full investigation into the questionable financial activities presented here today. Is that understood?" His words echoed through the room. Diane sank into her seat, silent at last. Her attorney swiftly gathered his materials, aware the case had been lost. Yet what followed was even more gratifying than the verdict itself. The judge continued, "A complete audit will be conducted on all financial transactions made by Mrs. Palmer during her marriage to the deceased. Due to the attempted unauthorized transfers, this matter is now being handed over to the relevant authorities for a formal investigation." Diane's face lost all color. Her children, who had earlier appeared so confident, left quickly without even glancing back at her. The carefully maintained image of the sorrowful widow was now completely destroyed. The truth that my father had always known was finally out in the open. As we exited the courthouse, Richard handed me an envelope. "Your father wanted you to have this after the hearing," he said gently. Inside, I found a letter and several old photos, pictures of the two of us standing proudly in front of our very first real estate project. The letter began, "My dearest Sophie, if you're reading this, then everything has gone according to plan. I knew Diane would reveal her true nature in the end. Though I regret ever letting her into our lives, I never questioned your resilience or your wisdom. This business we built, it belongs to you now. You were always my real partner." Tears welled up in my eyes as I read his words, but they weren't tears of grief. He had given me more than just his legacy. He gave me the peace of knowing justice had been done. With thoughtful planning and vision, he made sure the truth would come to light. That night, I sat in what was once my father's study, now mine, and noticed something surprising. Diane's luxury handbag still rested in the corner. She would be back to collect her personal items soon, but that would be her final time stepping foot into a house that had never truly been hers. 2 weeks after the court decision, I started sorting through my father's possessions. Every room in the house carried memories, but none more powerful than his study. That space was sacred. It was where he had introduced me to the world of real estate, where he patiently walked me through property reports and market analyses, even when I was barely old enough to understand. Diane had arranged to retrieve her belongings under legal supervision. As I got ready for her last visit, I stumbled upon something unexpected, a hidden compartment in my father's desk. Inside was a journal, filled with entries documenting everything. He had carefully noted each incident, Diane's manipulative tactics, her mysterious phone calls, and the times she snuck into his files late at night. My father had been fully aware of her intentions, but chose to protect what mattered most while keeping up appearances. The ongoing police inquiry into Diane's financial dealings uncovered even more than we'd imagined. In the final weeks of my father's life, she had attempted to shift nearly $300,000 from his accounts. The lead detective found that this pattern wasn't new. Similar financial behavior had occurred in her past relationships as well. She had a well-documented past of preying on wealthy, older men, though none had ever been as prepared as my father. Determined to uphold his legacy, I dedicated myself entirely to running the business, strengthening the foundation he had so carefully built. The employees embraced me warmly, many of them having known me since childhood. They had seen firsthand how my father had guided me toward leadership, often sharing stories of how he would proudly show them pictures of my milestones, my college graduation, my first real estate transaction, and the many successes that followed. One evening, as I pored over old contracts, my phone rang unexpectedly. It was Thomas, one of Diane's children. His voice wavered with hesitation as he said, "Sophie, I just wanted to apologize. We always knew what our mother was doing, but we never intervened. Your father was a good man. He deserved better." His words caught me off guard, but they also validated everything I had suspected. Even her own children had recognized the deception. Thomas went on to explain that Diane had orchestrated similar schemes before, always targeting affluent older men. But my father had been different. He had anticipated her motives and successfully outmaneuvered her. Under my leadership, the business flourished. Wanting to add my own touch to my father's legacy, I established a scholarship fund for aspiring real estate professionals in his honor. The first recipient was a young woman whose single father had sacrificed everything to ensure she received a proper education. It felt as though things had come full circle. The day Diane returned to collect her belongings was tense. She arrived with her lawyer and 2 movers, her appearance noticeably less refined than during the hearing. As she wandered through the house, she hesitated in front of certain possessions, particularly the extravagant decorations she had persuaded my father to buy. Richard, ever diligent, reminded her firmly, "You may take only what you personally purchased. Everything else remains." He had compiled a meticulous inventory of the estate's assets, and as Diane realized how little she was entitled to, her expression hardened. I chose to keep my distance, remaining in my father's study while they packed. From my seat, I could hear her murmuring about supposed family heirlooms, items that had never truly belonged to her. Richard intercepted her attempts to claim objects that had once belonged to my mother or had been in our family for generations. The most gratifying moment came when she tried to take an antique grandfather clock, claiming my father had promised it to her. Without missing a beat, Richard produced an old photograph from 3 decades ago, showing the clock standing in our living room long before Diane had entered our lives. His voice was firm but controlled. "Mrs. Palmer, let's not make this more complicated than it needs to be." The clock stayed, as did numerous other items she had hoped to take. As Diane reached the foyer, she hesitated for a brief moment. For an instant, I thought she might attempt to apologize or offer some semblance of reconciliation. Instead, she spoke with bitterness. "You may think you've won, but in the end, you'll end up alone, just like your father did." Stepping out of the study, I faced her directly, my voice calm and unwavering. My father was never alone. He had me, his true family, by his side until the very end. That's something you never understood and never will. Without another word, she turned and left. As the door shut behind her, a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying lifted. The house felt lighter, as if her departure had chased away a lingering shadow. I walked through each room, running my fingers over the familiar surfaces, finally feeling at home again. 1 year later, I sat at my desk, once my father's, now mine, reviewing the latest property acquisition. Under my leadership, the business had expanded into new markets while upholding the principles of integrity that my father had instilled. His framed photograph rested on my desk, a constant reminder of the lessons he had taught me. The investigation into Diane's financial activities had concluded, revealing a long history of fraud that stretched back well before she had met my father. She had faced legal consequences for her attempts to siphon funds from his accounts in his final days. The last I had heard, she had relocated to another state, her carefully constructed facade of a grieving widow completely shattered. The house had truly become my home again. While I preserved the elements that carried family memories, I also updated parts of it to reflect my own style. My mother's paintings were once again displayed in the living room, and the grandfather clock remained in the foyer, its steady chimes a familiar source of comfort. Most importantly, I had honored my father's legacy not just by maintaining what he had built, but by expanding upon it. The scholarship program had already helped 3 promising students take their first steps in real estate development. Healing, I realized, often arrives in unexpected ways. For me, it came through the unwavering respect and affection I saw in the eyes of our employees whenever they spoke of my father. They would recall his kindness, his integrity in business, and above all, how deeply proud he had always been of me. These experiences made me realize that my father's true legacy wasn't merely found in the wealth he accumulated or the assets he left behind. Instead, it lived on in the people he influenced and the principles he passed down. Just last week, while going through his study, I came across an old photo album I had somehow overlooked before. Tucked inside was a letter, written just days before he passed away. Sophie, you have always been stronger than you realize. Never forget that true success isn't measured by financial gains alone, but by the ability to uphold your integrity while achieving it. You have made me proud in ways I never could have foreseen. In the end, the true triumph wasn't simply about reclaiming what was rightfully mine, it was about honoring my father's legacy by embodying the values he instilled in me. The business continues to flourish, but what matters most is that it does so with the same unwavering commitment to honesty and integrity that my father always upheld. Diane's relentless pursuit to take what didn't belong to her only served to highlight the strength I had inherited from him. Ultimately, the greatest form of justice isn't always found in legal battles, it's in proving that honesty and righteousness will always stand the test of time.